Nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world, and then shall the end come.
Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?
Prophecies foretell a time in the near future when every person will be required to have a universally recognized, unique identification number in order to participate in society. The compulsory numbering system will be administered by the Antichrist and his global governing system. We will discuss the ongoing fulfillment of this most ominous prophecy on today's edition of End of the Age. So I'm going to be discussing today the ID2020, the United Nations effort to number every human on the planet. I've written articles and things on this, been on the radio with it, but it's not going away, folks. It's actually taking it to another level, and we're going to discuss that on today's program. So ID2020, precursor to the mark of the beast? Well, it absolutely could be. Before I get into that, I have a couple announcements real quick. My daughter Holly and my wife Jana are over our tour here. We take a tour to Israel twice a year. And we're going to be going here in April 25th through May 11th. And they're going to Israel and Jordan. And we've got 6 spots left. And so they wanted to let you know that if you'd like to be in one of those 6 spots, we've got, I think, almost 70 people going, and we've got 6 spots left that we've got seats for. And so we wanted to let you know that if you'd like to go, it's an awesome trip. I've had pastors and different things tell me over the years, oh my goodness, Dave, I'll never preach the same again. I've been preaching 30 years, 40 years. It's been my lifelong dream to come over here, having experienced it firsthand rather than just reading about it in the Bible. I'll never preach. All my stories have just changed. And so what a great, awesome, wonderful experience. I went there first time in 1999. We flew into Syria, which is now war-torn. They've had a 7-year civil war going on there. But we flew into Damascus, and then we went into Palmyra, which has been mainly destroyed by ISIS. A lot of different things have happened when we went overseas, and then I went down into Israel. What a wonderful trip. And I've been, of course, I don't know how many times since then, but you need to go with us sometime. And in this spring, we've got 6 seats left. So if you want to go, now would be a great time to go. And then you'll get to go into Jordan. They're going to be going down to Petra and a lot of different places. So what a great trip. And call in, talk to Holly, talk to my wife Jana, and sign up for the trip. I think it'll change your life. It really will. What a great experience we've had over the years. And secondly, Irvin Baxter is going to be teaching a prophecy conference here in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. And he's going to be in Hurst, Texas, this coming Saturday, March the 10th. And he's going to be teaching Trump, Jerusalem, and Armageddon. It's a new lesson. And so join him March the 10th, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. at the Way of Life Church. And that's at 1332 Yates Drive in Hurst, Texas, 76053. Join Irvin down there. What a great lesson. A lot of information. It's a brand new lesson. And so join him for a great conference coming up this weekend, March the 10th. Now, we're talking about, on today's program, ID2020, the United Nations effort to number every human being on the planet. Could it be a precursor to the mark of the beast? It's very possible that it could be. I didn't say it would be, I said it absolutely could be. Because you see, what's going to happen is there is a numbering of every human being on the planet that's going to be established and running when the Antichrist comes into power. So he's not going to come into power and say, well, I've got a number, everybody. He's going to come into power 3.5 years into the final 7 years, and he's going to usurp authority over an existing numbering system. And because he's only going to rule for 3.5 years. And so he's going to come into power, and he's going to use that numbering system to economically sanction individuals to get them to bow down to his edicts. And so that's what we'll be talking about today, because they've taken, they've actually laid out plans. How are we going to implement this? You go to the ID2020 website and the United Nations websites. You do your research on all of this. And they actually talked about it in Davos, Switzerland recently. And so we'll talk about it on today's program. And so what happened was in May of 2016 at the United Nations headquarters in New York, they had the inaugural ID2020 summit that brought together 400 people to discuss how to provide a unique digital identity to everyone on the planet. Now, when we get back, I'll tell you something that happened at Davos, Switzerland in January, and then we'll take off into it. I'll explain to you ID 2020 and the efforts to number every human being on the planet, because, folks, we're headed there. We're not looking for the end times to begin. We're presently in the end time. This stuff is happening, and this is the system that could be used by the Antichrist.
We live in critical times. If the final 7 years started today, would you know what to do? God's people need to understand the prophecies that are taking place. Daniel 11:33 says, "And they that understand among the people shall instruct many." To guide the people around us, we must first receive instruction ourselves on the biblical prophecies of the end time. End Time Ministries is introducing the End Time 1000. We have created Jerusalem Prophecy College online to help you be ready to inform those around you. The goal is to have at least 1,000 people prepared to instruct others. By joining the End Time 1000, you can fulfill Daniel 11:33. Sign up for Jerusalem Prophecy College online and be equipped to guide your friends and loved ones during the final 7 years. Go to JerusalemProphecyCollege.com. That's JerusalemProphecyCollege.com.
We got married in 2003. We clashed immediately. Everything seemed to be going wrong. We started following End Time Ministries, and we started going to End Time Bible studies.
About our life's never been the same. It's just been so powerful and so great, and God has done such a mighty work that saved my life, and it saved my soul for eternity.
God did use this ministry to literally bring us to Him and make the old man pass away and the new man come to life.
Thank you for giving to End Time Ministries.
Offering hope to people like us.
With every dollar, you change lives and provide hope for people just like Mark and Adrian. Thank you for giving to End Time Ministries.
So, in discussing ID 2020, Business Insider reports that in Davos, Switzerland, in January 22nd this year, the ID 2020 Alliance, as it's now being called, announced that new members, Microsoft, Mercy Corps, Hyperledger, and the United Nations International Computing Center have now joined Accenture as partners in the alliance. Microsoft is going to be donating $1 million to the effort, joining Accenture and, get this, the Rockefeller, imagine that, the Rockefeller Foundation as the major donors to the initiative. The Rockefellers involved in numbering every human on the planet. Doesn't seem too far out there, does it? If you know the prophecies of the Bible and the way that the Rockefellers have been involved in this world government that's being established. So consequently, the effort by the world government to number every human being is not going away. So let's discuss the ID2020 and the potential for it to become the mark of the beast. In the early stages of the system that's prophesied, this global numbering system prophesied in the Bible, most of us refer to it as the mark of the beast. Receiving a number is going to really seem harmless. I mean, most of us have numbers. Social Security numbers, bank numbers, PIN numbers, a lot of different things. And not unlike a debit card or a Social Security number, I have a Social Security number, Irvin, Baxter, we all have Social Security numbers. So it's not a bad thing necessarily to take a number. And these numbers, the Social Security number, I use it to function in everyday life. Do your taxes. I mean, you guys know, to hold a job, anything like that. But it's going to get, it'll be used to economically sanction people. A unique identification number will be used to economically sanction people in the future. So right now it's just a number. Right now it's different numbers handed out by the United Nations, different things around the world, national ID cards. But that's what they're trying to do, is to establish a global numbering system. Now, take for instance, most nations are currently functioning under a national ID system, which allows the citizens access to government subsidies, financial transactions, health care, insurance, etc. So take a look at, for instance, Uganda. Without a national identity card in Uganda, they're not able to qualify for employment, so you can't have a job. There's no education for your children at all. You're not allowed to educate anything. Without a national ID card, no access to education. You're not allowed to travel, no driver's license, nothing, or health care. No health care for your family without a national ID. So you see how they can draw you in just simply by issuing you a number. The News International reports that North Koreans not only require an identity card, but also need a travel with a specified destination and a written permission from the government. And without that national ID, it's possible that they are punished with time in a labor camp for simply not carrying their ID card. And India is currently undertaking the planet's largest 12-digit national identification number project. We're talking about just over 1 billion people here. So the majority of the earth already are functioning under a numbering system. These guys, India is embarking on, they're trying to track to register its entire 1.25 billion population through the Aadhaar digital ID. Now, currently there are only a handful of countries globally that do not have a compulsory or a mandatory national ID card system already established and functioning. So you can see that it's already been set in place in many ways. Numbering people. Why do you number people? The only reason you number people is to be able to control them. If I can give you a number and then give you government subsidies and things and get you relying upon that, then all I have, and then let's say the Antichrist, in this case, the Antichrist would take over. And he says, I want you to do X, pledge allegiance to me, this, that, and the other. And if he says, if you won't do that, I'll invalidate your number, keeping you, giving you the inability to have access to these government subsidies. So if the government can give you something, the government has the ability to take that away if you're not compliant with their edicts. So think about this in the light of Bible prophecy. Once the Antichrist assumes full control of the world government, this numbering system will be turned into a method of control. Now, judging by the current moves toward a cashless society, many of you all, we've talked about that for a long time, it's likely that by then most purchases will be made digitally and everyone will rely on their particular number for even the most basic essentials. Without it, no one's going to be able to legally buy or sell anything. And in order for an individual's number to remain active, he or she is going to be forced to worship or pledge allegiance to the Antichrist and his system. And according to the Scripture, this is the exact individual economic sanctioning model that's going to be used by the Antichrist to force the world into compliance to his global governing structure. Just like they sanction nations now, like we're sanctioning North Korea, we're sanctioning Iran, they will endeavor to bring that down to an individual level at some point in the future when the Antichrist takes control. So the prophecy itself, many of you are familiar with it. It's found in Revelation chapter 13, verse 16 through 18. It says, "And he, the Antichrist, causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666, 666. So you notice that the Antichrist will cause the small, the poor, the bond to receive a mark as well. So really, until I began researching some of this, I never focused on this particular part of the prophecy. And the poor and the bond, they have nothing. Many would think that they have nothing to offer society or to offer the Antichrist. Now, I don't feel that way, but I'm just, in the grand scheme of things, they talk about developed nations, underdeveloped nations, and a lot of people have said, well, why mess with some of these individuals? People that come in out of the bush to get a bowl of rice a day just to feed their family. Why would they, they're now making them receive a number just to get that bowl of rice. It's pathetic. But it's not their money that the Antichrist is going to be after. It's all about dependency, adherence to his system, allegiance and absolute control, a form of worship, if you will. That's it. You only number people to be able to control them. And at the peak of the Antichrist reign over the world government, this Antichrist individual will see absolute compliance to his system as a mode of worship. Pledge allegiance to me only. And just look how closely the prophecy aligns with many of the global numbering systems being proposed today. We're currently seeing precursors to this system forced on indigent people around the globe. For instance, the Central African Republic is claimed to be one of the poorest nations on the earth. And per capita, their income is estimated to be about $640 US dollars in 2015, the entire year. So many of them rely on aid for survival in some of the harshest living conditions on the planet. However, they're told that the lack of a national identification card is going to keep them from being recognized and protected by national law, and it excludes them from legal protection, eliminates their ability to vote, disqualifies them from obtaining a formal employment, and it blocks any and all social services benefits and development schemes. Access to health care for their children who are very sick. Got to have a national ID or sorry, we can't help you. There are already people that are being economically sanctioned to comply with these national ID systems. So these people are destitute and unable to give anything in return for the assistance. But in order to be protected by the government in many of them war-torn countries, and to be granted just the basic needs of society, they're required to have a number. This is in 2018, okay? And you say, well, why? That seems crazy. Because governments know the only reason to number people is to track and control them. Why in other words, to give these people a bowl of rice, to give them a health care, different things. Why make them have a number? We got to ask ourselves that. Why? I mean, I can treat a child's broken arm or a sickness that they have without a 10-year-old child having to be given a number. So we've got to ask ourselves, why are these countries around the world being so dogmatic on these national ID systems? Because there's an agenda that's driving these numbering systems. And the goal is the world government wants every human being on the earth to have a digital identification number. That's where we're headed. And you say, well, how do you know that? Because it's in the Sustainable Development Goals that all nations of the earth signed on to back in 2015. The Obama administration signed the United States onto that as well. Everyone have their own unique digital identification number. And ID2020 is the major effort by the United Nations to implement that. So, although there are really others, I want to focus on just one of the particular international numbering projects currently being proposed to include the poorest, from the richest to the poorest individuals on the earth. And these folks, they probably don't fully grasp what a venture like this could lead to. However, for those who understand Bible prophecy, this endeavor, or one similar, could be laying the groundwork for the future global numbering system of the Antichrist. You can see, I've got some charts and things I'm going to go over here in just a little bit. So it would be important. If you're listening to me on the radio, you want to see me go over these charts. I'm not to that point yet. I'll get there. But you'd have to go watch the archive at endtime.com of this program. Very important, because I'm going to show you how they're going to implement this stuff. They've got plans to implement this ID 2020 throughout the world. So you say, well, what are these Sustainable Development Goals? Because that's what's driving this. Think of it like this: the Paris Climate Agreement that was signed after the Sustainable Development Goals were signed in September of 2015. Then the Paris Climate Agreement were commitments by all the nations of the world to implement the global warming climate change part of the Sustainable Development Goals. Well, this ID 2020 is an effort to get the nations to buy into and commit to implementing this global ID system. It's the same thing. And so it's the United Nations effort to number every human being. So you say, well, what are the Sustainable Development Goals? Because that's where all of this is stemming from. You got to understand this. The Sustainable Development Goals were unanimously, every nation, adopted by the 193 member states of the United Nations, like I said, including us, the United States, back in September of 2015. And the goals, there's 17 goals, they make up the international community's really a 15-year socialistic blueprint of the global governance of every person on the planet. And it was aptly named. They're not even trying to hide it. Transforming Our World, this is the name. We want to transform our world, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. It was signed in 2015. They wanted to implement all of these goals by 2030. So the goal is of the Sustainable Development, the goal is all the Sustainable Development Goals collectively is a universal policy agenda designed to convert the nations of the world into a global community governed by the United Nations. That's the goal. All the nations of the world sign on to it, and they've got one track mind, one constitution, one charter that they all run on, and it's this Sustainable Development Goals set forth by the United Nations. That's what they wanted to do. All the nations bought into it, and they march off implementing these goals. So the agenda, like I said, is comprised of 17 main goals, and it's accompanied by 169 focused targets tagged on to each goal. And it's designed to manage the planet, every individual on the planet, no one left behind. And you say, well, why do you say socialistic plan? Well, I say socialistic because the plan includes the socialistic principle of wealth redistribution. And it states that it actually states the reduction of inequality will only be possible if wealth is shared and income inequality is addressed. They want to take from the developed nations and funnel money to the underdeveloped nations. And I'll show you that in a chart here in just a moment, to equal out. It's socialism. It's equaling the haves and the have-nots. Think of Karl Marx Communist Manifesto. They talked about the haves and the have-nots. They didn't like that. They said that's a conflict in society, so we need to equal that out. Well, the United Nations is a socialistic entity. So we want to take from individuals who have worked and have taken risks and built businesses and things like that. Well, you have too much. In the United States, because of capitalism and the ingenuity of people who have built businesses and worked hard, they say, well, you're a developed nation, so we need to take from you and give to these underdeveloped nations, and it's a wealth redistribution scheme, just like global warming and climate change. So that's what is behind, one of the agendas behind these Sustainable Development Goals. So I refer to it as socialistic because of that. I refer to it as a global governance of every aspect of every person on the earth, since the plan actually states we commit to making fundamental changes in the way that our societies produce and consume goods and services, the food, electricity, everything, and the governments, international organizations, the business sector, and other non-state actors and individuals must contribute to changing the unsustainable consumption and production patterns for every human being on the planet. So the propaganda is that humans are using the earth's resources at such a rate that nothing's going to be left for future generations. Therefore, the United Nations has taken it upon themselves, the world government, that they must establish a master plan to govern the earth's citizens. And it must, number one, in true socialistic form, redistribute the wealth of the world so that everyone is considered equal. Number two, control the production and consumption of every human being. Number three, strive to achieve universal health care. Does that sound familiar? Universal health care, Obamacare. Number four, control the climate. God controls the climate, not mankind. Number five, manage our cities and infrastructure. Number six, govern the oceans. Number seven, govern land usage along with all the ecosystems. These are the Sustainable Development Goals, and folks, this is world government. So, when we get back from the break, I'll get more off into ID 2020.
Israel, there is no other place like it on the face of the earth. Over 4,000 years ago, God gave this land to Abraham and his seed and said that he would put his name in Jerusalem. The world watches as this tiny nation stands in spite of all the obstacles. Irvin and Judy, along with the End Time team, would like to invite you to travel with us to the Holy Land. This trip will be a wonderful and life-changing experience. Our Spring End Time Prophecy Tour will have the privilege of being the first End Time tour to visit Jerusalem as the recognized capital of Israel. Some of the highlights will be the Mount of Olives, the Temple Mount, the Tomb of Jesus, the boat ride on the Sea of Galilee, the baptisms in the Jordan River, and we will also visit Petra in Jordan. If you would like to experience the Bible in full color, join us April 26th through May 11th, 2018. Call 1-800-END-TIME, that's 1-800-363-8463, and press 2, or go to endtime.com/Israel Tour to receive your information today.
Do you believe we're living in the end times? If so, what's the one magazine you should subscribe to? End Time is the magazine designed to guide you through the end times. Irvin highly recommends End Time magazine so you can stay informed with what's going on in the news and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Call 1-800-363-8463 and get End Time magazine for 2 years for only $29. Call 1-800-END-TIME or go to endtime.com to take advantage of this special offer.
If your station only carries the first 30 minutes of End of the Age, go to endtime.com and click the watch button to continue today's broadcast. You can also finish up later by clicking the archives button.
So, in talking about ID 2020, the United Nations effort to manage, to number every human on the planet, the problem is the administration of the plan. What's the old saying? You can't manage what you can't measure. So consider the size of the effort. Giving everyone on the planet, there are approximately 7 billion people on the earth today. Target 8 of goal number 3 is to achieve universal health care. Think about that. How do you roll out such a system and then monitor it effectively? You can't go by a name. Think of it. There are tens of thousands of John Smiths in the United States alone. And that's why the only conceivable solution to track the administration of this plan is to, just the healthcare plan, is to ensure that every human has a unique identification number in the Sustainable Development Goals. How are they going to do that? Simple. Goal number 16.8 and 16.9 states this: the Transforming Our World, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the preamble states, as we embark on this collective journey of global governance, we pledge that no one will be left behind. So, Goal 16 and Target 8 and Target 9 of the Sustainable Development Goals both strive to include every person on the earth in this ever-expanding global governing system of the United Nations. Goal 16.8 states, we want to broaden and strengthen the participation of developing countries in the institutions of global governance. They're not even really trying to hide what they want. And then Goal 16, Target 9 states that by 2030, we want to provide a legal identity for all, including birth registrations. So, in order for the elite to establish a true global government, in their mind, it must include every single person on the planet. It makes no difference if they live in a jungle or it exists in the slums of an inner city or make up the poorest of the poor. One can understand the desire to want to help the poor. I do. We can offer to give them a bowl of soup, to provide a bath, a place to sleep for the night, or even a new pair of shoes. It's simply the right thing to do. The problem is forcing these individuals to receive legal identification papers or an identification number in order to gain access to some of those provisions. Allowing someone to take a bath. Nope, got to have your number. It's horrible. And there are major efforts being made to implement these Sustainable Development Goals by supplying the poorest people on the planet their own unique identification number. Why? They claim that refugees, migrants, and this is the propaganda we're being sold. They claim that refugees, migrants, and the poor must have a way to identify themselves in order to function in society. That's not the overall goal. Remember, Goal 16.8 of the Sustainable Development Goals is to broaden and strengthen the participation of developing countries in the institutions of global governance. That's the goal. Now, you don't see that on the headlines, but if you dig into their charters and different things in their agenda, that's what it is. Drawing every nation into participation in institutions of global governance is the driver. And you see, my friends, in the beginning, this numbering system is going to look like an investment in the future of the poor. That's what we're being sold. All these refugees from these war-torn countries, they don't have an ID. So we need to set up this global blockchain technology and so we can ID everybody so that they have papers in that country, but we don't even know who they are if they come to our country. Well, part of the Sustainable Development Goals is to control the migration of people around the world so people aren't concentrated in one certain area. I mean, they're trying to manage the planet and everybody on it. But in the last days, the Antichrist is going to use this numbering system as a method of control. So let's talk about ID2020 then. In May of 2016, the first ID2020 summit was held at the United Nations headquarters in New York. And the summit itself brought together 400 people from 150 private sector companies and 11 UN agencies to discuss how to, this is what they all came together for, to provide a unique digital identity to every person on the planet, including the 1.5 billion people living without any form of recognized identification. So some of the companies in attendance were Bloomberg, Brigham Young University, Cisco Systems, Cornell University, Ernst & Young, Forbes, Google, IBM, JP Morgan, NASDAQ, and then now more recently Microsoft, Mercy Corps, Hyperledger, and the United Nations International Computing Center. And they've now joined Accenture as partners in the alliance. Microsoft is going to donate $1 million to the effort, joining Accenture and the Rockefeller Foundation as major donors in this initiative. So you've got all the big boys on the planet on the team to develop a way to implement and manage this global numbering system. The two main outcomes from that meeting were, number one, a widespread consensus among the ID2020 attendees that identity is both a fundamental right and a necessary prerequisite for the success of the Sustainable Development Goals. So we've got to, in order for these Sustainable Development Goals to be implemented, remember, transforming the planet by 2030, in order for these to be implemented, we've got to give everybody their own unique identification number. Number two, sweeping commitments from the conference attendees were to contribute towards the shared goal of a universal digital identity. Plain and simple. So, but did you catch something there? The world government, the United Nations, views a universal digital identity as absolutely necessary for the success of their global governing scheme to transform the world by 2030. I want to make sure you caught that. So, ID2020.org, it answers these questions. Why identity? It's very important. Why give out a number? I mean, you say, a number's not necessarily used to control people. Oh, really? Ask that to the Jews that were in the Holocaust. Every time I go to Yad Vashem in Israel, the largest Holocaust museum, there's a huge section there on the numbering of the Jews where they were tattooed on their arm. Why did they number them? Why? It was to control them, to track them, to know who was where a certain person should go, this, that, and the other, access to food, a work thing. That they numbered them. Why? The only reason you number people is to control and track them. You say, well, Dave, you're going a little too far. It's happening all over the world. National ID systems. There's only a handful of nations that do not have a compulsory or a mandatory national ID. If you want anything to do with government, healthcare, education, anything, you've got to have a number. It's to control and track people because it's issued by the government, and then the government says, okay, now that you have a number, you have access to education, a job, a driver's license, you can be able to travel. But as long as you play along, then you can have a valid number. But the Antichrist is going to come along and say, well, if you don't want to comply with the edicts of my one world governing body and pledge allegiance to me, then I'm going to invalidate your number and you don't have access to all these government subsidies or health care or anything. So you can see how he could economically sanction an individual. So the ID2020 website answers the question, why an identity? Well, they say it's a fundamental human right. Article 6 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights stipulates that everyone has the right to a recognition everywhere as a person before the law. The Sustainable Development Goals include Target 16.9, which aims to provide legal identity to all, including birth registration, by 2030. It's all a world government scheme necessary to access basic services. So individuals are required to show identification to access health care, education, to vote, to access other social assistance programs. It's all about tracking and control. They say it's critical for accountability and governance. Well, I know that's what's behind it, is the governance part. Governments without an accurate system of identification struggle to provide well-coordinated social services simply because the number of beneficiaries is unknown and precise targeting is impossible. And without clear registries, the risk of leakages and corruption are very high. In Nigeria, enrollment of civil servants saved approximately $75 million by eliminating ghost workers on payroll, people who didn't have an identification. So they also say that it's a gateway to economic opportunity. Now, this is already under economic sanctioning. Think about this. More than 2.5 billion adults do not have a bank account or use formal financial services in the earth, making it difficult to move out of poverty or to weather a period of hardship. So they say connecting people with digitally based financial tools and services requires accessible, secure, and verifiable ID systems. And then they say it's important for gender equality, which is a large part of the Sustainable Development Goals. This all goes back to the Sustainable Development Goals, the 2030 agenda by the United Nations to control every person. You say, well, what's gender equality got to do with it? Well, they say women with an official identity are empowered to play a greater role in household decisions and maintain financial independence. Furthermore, they say identification can be an important defense against child marriage, exploitation, and trafficking. Man, they're really selling this numbering system, aren't they? Then they say a key enabler of global development. That's very true. In addition to the intrinsic benefit of an identity, it's a necessary prerequisite for achieving many of the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. International goals will be difficult to reach or measure without a way to identify beneficiaries. So let's pause just a second, because I want you to notice the similarities of the ID2020 project and the prophecy found in Revelation 13, 16 through 18. You know, according to this prophecy, in the end time, the Antichrist is going to cause everyone on earth to receive their own unique identification number in order to function in society. It's going to be implemented to such a degree that without this ID number, a person is not going to have the ability to buy or sell. You say, well, how would they implement that? Well, I want you to consider a couple charts that I have here. And I'm going to hold them up because this says, why an alliance? And why would these people form an alliance to give everybody their own unique identification number? And it shows here, and you can find these charts if you email me or Doug. I can send you the link to the chart or the link to the website where you can go see the charts. But it shows how they would implement this. And I tell you what, I'm coming up to a break, so I'm going to get into these charts just after we get back from the break here. Because I want you to see how they've already got plans to implement this. I've got two charts that we need to go over, and they're already way off into this. This didn't start yesterday. And it looks like a precursor to the eventual number system that could be used by the mark of the beast. The seat of world government, the United Nations, is implementing this stuff. And they're not waiting. This is not something they're dreaming of doing. They're going ahead and trying to implement this stuff in several countries. So when we get back from the break, I'll go over a couple of these charts and then describe some more about this ID 2020 agenda.
Move Mountains with Irvin Baxter, the new book by Irvin's grandson, provides 30 days of devotion that will enhance your connection to God and others. Authentic illustrations from early morning devotions at End Time will help you find your purpose and eliminate fears. Commit to taking this 30-day journey and experience real life change. Order this brand new book for only $14.99. Call 1-800-363-8463 or go to endtime.com/move.
Turn your scriptures from black and white into color. Experience the footsteps of Jesus. Understand Bible prophecy that is coming to pass right now. Join Irvin and Judy Baxter and the End Time team this spring 2018 for a life-changing trip to Israel and Jordan. Mark your calendar for April 26th through May 11th for this amazing journey. Call 1-800-END-TIME, that's 1-800-363-8463 and press 2, or go to endtime.com/Israel-tour to receive your information today.
So what they've done is they've actually tried to institute these in a few of the countries. This one here happens to be Malawi. And what they've done, you remember I talked about that in the Sustainable Developments is part of it is about wealth redistribution. Well, look how they've put all this out. They've got developed nations on this part. This one's the United States, the United Kingdom, Japan, the European Union, and Norway, which are all developed nations. And what they do is they will funnel money to the international organizations, the UNDP, the UNHCR, all these United Nations, UNICEF, these United Nations organizations. They funnel money to them, and then they go to the Malawi government and they say, okay, we have this funding. Let's go and through the Ministry of Health, the National Registration Bureau, and the Electrical Commission in Malawi, we will implement national ID cards to people from birth to death. Now, this is very important. They want to control, as soon as a child's born, they want to issue it a national ID number. And then all the way till the time a person passes away, they want to issue them a national ID card, and they're going to say, okay, for birth registration, vaccination, your child health care, voter registration, refugee registration, you have to have a national ID from birth to death. That's how they're implementing it. And it's what it is, it's a wealth redistribution scheme. They're saying, we'll fund this by developed nations, funnel the money to these international organizations, the United Nations organizations that they have set up to disperse these funds. They go to the Malawian government down to a nationalistic situation, and then it goes down to an individual situation. And so you can imagine in the future, the Antichrist sitting at the helm of this world governing system, and this number system, a global numbering system is already established. The Antichrist comes along and says, okay, this numbering system is established. We told you we were going to establish it because of refugees and things like that. And you know what? This is a key point. Because there are probably people that work at the United Nations and different things that are sincere. And I had some people that went to the United Nations a lot that came to my Bible study when I had it in New York. And they didn't know anything about world government. So there are probably people that are trying to implement these things right now that are sincere in what they're doing. And so they're going to get a global numbering system established, whether it's ID2020 or something else. This looks like it could be it, though, because it's the United Nations' main effort right now, and we're already into 2018. So there are people that are probably sincere. So they're going to get a numbering system established. However, there will come a time when the mark of the beast, or the Antichrist, usurps authority over this world government. It's going to happen 3.5 years prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ. That's when He's revealed. And that 3.5 year period, the time of the tribulation, that's when the mark of the beast is going to be doled out. So there will come a time when the Antichrist will usurp authority over this, and he says, hey, I've got a global numbering system established, a digital numbering system, and I can use this to economically sanction people to bow down to my edicts. So what will happen, this is a scenario, hypothetical. I have a good friend of mine who is a policeman here in the DFW Metroplex. He says that their method of enforcement is to ask somebody to do something, a perpetrator, whatever, ask them, and then tell them, and then make them. You ask, tell, and then you make somebody. Well, that may be how the Antichrist does. He may come to power as this really suave, a great orator, this politician, and everybody kind of thinks, wow, this guy's pretty cool. He's the leader of the world government. But there will come a time when the Bible says the dragon or Satan gives him and this entity their seat, power, and their great authority. And the Antichrist is going to be, we believe, possessed by Satan at some point. He's going to be a very evil person. You can't do the things he's going to do and not be run by Satan. And he's going to persecute Israel. He's going to persecute the church. He's going to persecute Jews. And so he's going to look at this numbering system and say, hey, I can use this numbering system to invalidate people's number if they don't want to comply. That's what the Bible says is going to happen. He's going to issue everybody a number, and without that number, you're not going to be able to buy or sell. And you can see how it's happening now. That leads me to my next chart. And this is the ID2020 website. You can go there. It says the challenge is that over 1 billion people will live without a legally recognized identity. And so what they're proposing is they say identity is foundational for political and economic opportunity. But they're not just wanting to number. They realize that most of the developed nations already have numbers. Remember, India's trying to implement a numbering system for all of their 1.25 billion people. Most nations on earth already have compulsory national ID cards. They're individual numbers for people. So they realize, well, what they're doing is they're saying, but the 1.x billion, 1.2 billion or something like that don't have it, we've got to get them on board. So, hey, they could be refugees, they could be migrants and different things. So we've got to get them a number, because if they go to another nation, they're, from a war-torn country, they always go to the nth degree when they describe this stuff or try to get people to buy in. Then we've got to get them a digital ID, or to the most destitute person on the planet, they've got to have a national ID. Why? Because it's all about control. They want to do away with borders and create this one global nation, this global community that answers to a world government. That's the goal behind all of this at the end of the day. And the Bible says that's how it's going to be in the end time. There's going to be a world government, a world religious system, and a world economic system. And they're going to be run by the Antichrist and the false prophet. So in this next chart, they are going to get extremely detailed by this. They say an identity is foundational for political and economic opportunity, and that this is a sample of potential public and private services that require a proof of identity. So they're saying from birth to death. They have a baby here, and then they have a full-grown human being. So from birth to death, these are services that you need a digital identification number to have have access to. They say birth registration, vaccine or health care, primary school eligibility, passport, a mobile phone, a driver's license, a bank account, a voter registration, refugee status, and property and business registration. So they're saying, really, you should have a national, it's going to be international before it's over with, an international digital ID to have access to these. And without that, imagine, there's no way you could function in society. Imagine, I'm thinking right now, if I didn't have a driver's license, my mobile phone, a bank account, property and business registration, a passport, I couldn't have went to school, it's primary school eligibility, any kind of health care. Imagine, how are you going to function in society? They're actually going to make it so that if you can't do your taxes, you're not going to be able to have a job. Here at End Time Ministries, a nonprofit organization, I have to have a Social Security number for our employees to be able to work here. So you can't have a job without this numbering system. Think about the Social Security number here in America right now. Take away my Social Security number today, and I could not have a job here because I couldn't do my taxes. And I couldn't get a bank loan. I couldn't have a bank account. I couldn't have a vehicle. I couldn't have a driver. You can't have anything without your Social Security number. And so they say this is from birth to death. This is just a sample. It'll get a whole lot more detailed than this. But they've got these charts on the ID2020 website, the United Nations effort to number every human being on the planet. And they're saying that this is just a sample of things that people would need a national ID to have access to. And without that, you can't have access to this. And you say, oh, Dave, come on. Now you're trying to sensationalize. It's already happening. Look around the world. That's why I brought up the national ID systems that are already set up around the world. And they're mandatory. There's only a handful. There's only I think 10 or 15 nations on the entire planet that do not have a compulsory, a mandatory national ID system. You say, well, man, I didn't realize we were that far off into it. Absolutely. And so they're talking about this as we speak, the ID2020. You can go research it. There's hundreds of articles on ID2020. It goes right, it's the United Nations effort to implement the Sustainable Development Goals, specifically Goal 16, Target 9, give everybody on earth their own unique identification number. And so I wanted to talk to you about it today because our program is devoted to using current events to show how prophecies written 2,000, 2,500 years ago are coming to pass right now. And the Bible says there will come a time, it's Revelation chapter 13, verse 16 through 18, there's going to come a time when a world leader, now this numbering system, this digital numbering system, was never possible until the invention of the computer and the internet. They're talking about implementing this with many of y'all have heard of the blockchain technology. Computers set up all over the world and this huge network set up. And the reason their propaganda is that, hey, if there's these people who have to immigrate and these refugees that come out of these war-torn countries, they have an agenda, let's say, identity in Syria, but because of the war that's going on there, they need to come to, let's say, America. Well, we don't know who they are. He says his name's John Smith, but we don't know who he is. So we've got to have a computer, a network system that's set up all over the world where these people could come here, type in their number, and immediately they've got an identity. So, and the thing is, look at how they have pushed the refugee agenda and the different things that have been happening around the world. You think that all happened by accident? I don't think so either. If the answer was no, I don't think so either. I mean, we allowed 12 million illegal immigrants into this country. That doesn't happen by accident, folks. And what they say, never waste a good crisis. They create a huge crisis and then they say, oh, we've got a refugee crisis around the world. We've got to have a way to solve it. Look at what's happening to America and the European Union, and there are terrorist acts happening. We've got to stem the tide of these refugees from these war-torn countries that are bringing in terrorists. So guess what we need? We need a numbering system for every person on the planet so we can ID them wherever they're at and control them and track them and everything that's going on. That's where all this stuff is headed. And remember, Hillary Clinton and other people have said, never waste a good crisis. And so ID2020, the United Nations effort to number every human being on the planet, could it be a precursor to the eventual mark of the beast? It absolutely could be. Can I guarantee you this is it? No, I can't. But I'm telling you what, it sure looks like it. If you go do the research, read their website, all of the major software companies and hardware, Microsoft, all of them are in on it. And so go do your research and keep up to date on it. Subscribe to End Time Magazine, go to our website, and you can read articles and different things on ID2020, an international ID.
End of the Age is a production of End Time Ministries. This broadcast will be available on our website, endtime.com, in the archives section. On our website, you'll also find more information about how current events are fulfilling Bible prophecy. To reach our operators, call 1-800-END-TIME. That's 1-800-363-8463. End Time Ministries is partner supported. We would like to say thank you to our partners who made this broadcast possible. To do what Matthew 24:14 said, to reach the world with the gospel of the kingdom.